I'm here to talk to you about the Collaborate project. And so I'm going to talk about the concept and the context, what happens in Collaborate, and some of the challenges, of which there are many. Collaborate project is a project that challenges primarily design students, but more recently students from other disciplines as well, in Australia and China, to collaborate online in ways that reflect, we believe, COFA Online, contemporary network practices. And we've been quite influenced by these ideas relating to globalism, which has introduced a lot of changes in the way people work. If you're a designer particularly, but I'd argue across all disciplines, you're probably noticing that things are changing very rapidly in the way people work. So it's a context of continuing change. Of course, it's driven by new technologies. And it's quite an uncertain landscape, one that presents us all with lots of challenges, but I also would argue to lots of opportunities as well. And it demands a new set of skills that we have to instigate in our students, and those skills are cross-disciplinary and collaborative. So that's across discipline and culture as well. People often ask me why Collaborate focuses on China. And there are a number of reasons for that, but the thing that was made clear to me while working as a head of a department in a university in Shanghai was that what happens in China affects everybody in the world, and it's something that you're not going to be able to escape from. The problem is that when you add China to the mix, things get very complicated. And as educators today, I would say the answer to this question is no, we're not really doing very well at it at all. Okay, so a little bit of history. What happens in C8? How's it come about? As I mentioned, I used to run a graphic design department at a private design school based at Donghua University in Shanghai. I did this for a number of years. During that time, I attended a conference at Shanghai Fashion Week, and there was a woman by the name of Anne Normoy, who was from TAFE, New South Wales, I believe, and she said this in her speech, and it made quite an impact on me, largely because it kind of echoed what I was already thinking. And so I started to look at how I might do this, bringing Chinese students and Australian students together. And I have to say, people thought I was a bit crazy when I started talking about it, and started to experiment with how to go about this. So I found a few teachers who were willing to work with me, and I began with two groups of graphic design students. One group from Raffles Design College in Shanghai, and one group from Kingscliff in northern New South Wales near Byron Bay. And there was a curious mix, very diverse culturally obviously, but also a mix of private and public education. In 2004 I started to work with interior design students and graphic design students from the same schools, and got enough positive feedback to encourage me to continue to find ways to move this forward. After a few years I moved to COFA, and in 2008 I received some funding to run another Collaborate project. I might start referring to Collaborate as C8, which is what I usually refer to it as. And I worked with the Omnium Research Group and used Omnium software as a platform. And the project, in line with the Omnium Research Group's agenda, had a very strong sustainability theme. And we put 94 students online together from 9 universities across Australia and China, and we worked for 8 weeks. We had a lot of input from academics and industry people from around the world. The cooperation between the universities was still quite informal, really basically at teacher level. Very much a matter of goodwill on part of the Chinese academics in particular, much to their credit. there was a research agenda here too. It was to identify relationships between culture and preferences for different types of online media. We actually found that that was only a very small part of the big picture, and so it kind of proceeded, in fact, as a research agenda. The structure of this project, this particular project, was set up like this over the 8 weeks, and it was divided into 5 stages. And this is a model that was developed by a guy at COFA called Rick Bennett, and he calls this his Online Creative Collaboration Model, OCC. Students were placed in teams and asked to respond to a series of small design briefs which led them to a resolved solution. In the middle of the project, I should mention the Sichuan Earthquake happened, which had a tremendous, terrible impact on obviously people involved directly with the earthquake, but right across China. And so we adapted the brief as we went. We got this project, which was a concept for a post-disaster school. It's just one screen from a much larger proposal. Various different levels of collaboration achieved in the project, as has been the case in all collaborative projects. And these are some of the outcomes from that project. Okay, now this year, the 4th Collaborate project is run, and it was run in collaboration with Professor Richard Goodwin, in fact. He's got a studio called Porosity, and we collaborated on a project that was conducted in a blended mode. So there was an online component which ran all the way through the 12 weeks of the project, but at this point in week 8 and 9 of the project, there was an intensive studio held at Donghua University in Shanghai. So we took 25 students there. The students respond to lectures that are posted online. Every few weeks we met for tutorials, and there were various different, this band across the middle here is comprised of talking points and research projects which were designed to prepare the students for their collaboration. Underpinning all that, the purple bar was the Porosity brief itself, which was focused on what we were going to do in China. Okay, so the 2-week studio included lectures, site visits, tutorial studios, online studio, and social gatherings, of course. And in week 1, the students initially presented an introductory video of themselves and a Pecha Kucha style presentation with a proposal. And they're encouraged to find collaborators to work with. The previous projects, students were always placed in teams, but we changed our approach this time, and it had a really strong impact. We had a series of lectures from COFA and Donghua University academics, and also we involved the global design agency IDEO in the development of a workshop where students brainstormed the challenges of cross-cultural collaboration, and that was actually quite a turning point in the whole procedure. Week 2 is devoted to studio and culminates in an exhibition. Okay, so here's some examples of some of the works that came out of that process. So there's a great diversity of approaches. The brief encouraged the students to engage with the city of Shanghai as a laboratory for experimentation across a whole range of disciplines. We had sculpture students, we had performance artists, we had graphic design students, and architecture students from the Bachelor of Design at COFA as well. One of our objectives, I guess for me at least, in terms of research and teaching, is about questions of trying to identify common ground. So where do the worlds of these design students from Donghua and COFA, Holly and Vivian, intersect? And I think a key issue is that of building trust. So how do we build enough trust between not only the students but also the lecturers and the institutions themselves to allow collaboration to occur. And what are the kinds of assumptions is it easy to make as a design educator? So what I'm going to go into now is the kinds of things that we've learned. So in each Collaborate to date, remember there have been 4 of them, a set of issues have emerged repeatedly. And these factors have come to signify in CA as what we call multiple realities within the project. Now I'm not making any sort of reference to reality here in a philosophical sense. It simply is about the experiences of the diversity of participants involved in a project like this, and that includes the conveners, the students themselves, the lecturers, and the mentors and industry people. They all have quite a different experience of what happens. As you can see from the quote here, one of our mentors described this as the interaction between multiple realities, and that's how this notion has come about. Okay, but also the issues of language, student expectations of learning, what learning is, what those environments are, styles of knowledge production have all proved to be important inputs into the formation of these realities. The outside forces there is a reference to the Sichuan Earthquake in 2008. So, what's East and West anyway? What do those terms mean? In fact, at least from my perspective, although there's not time here to sort of get into a discussion of Orientalism, the concept of the East is a Western construction. And this doesn't really take into consideration the diversity of China itself. So culturally based assumptions have significant impacts. And I know that even though I lived and worked in China for a while, over the years of working on CA, I myself made numerous assumptions, incorrect assumptions in fact, in implementing the project. Now, for example, one of the things we do is we ask students to post a profile of themselves. And I assume, as probably you do too as teachers, that the students will just naturally perform the tasks that we give them. Particularly like Chinese students, they follow the instructions of their lecturers, very, very closely, right? But in fact, Confucian heritage students aren't that used to posting profiles about themselves online, even despite their massive embrace of the internet that's well documented. So whereas Australian students posted very ebulliently about who they are and what they liked and what they were doing, Chinese students in our project posted greetings to other students and wishes that the project would be successful. Often the Chinese students didn't post a profile. They remained silent, in fact. So what we've found consistently, however, that when we gave students the opportunity to share stories that related to their culture through image, this is always consistently in our projects yielded very strong outcomes. And we argue that this is a mechanism that can build an appropriate level of trust to foster collaboration between these very diverse cultures. Okay, I bet you are, or at least some of you are saying, what about language? You might be surprised to find that many students, particularly Chinese students, were quite adamant that language was not an issue for their understanding and cognition in our project in 2008. In 2009, during the blended studio, language was widely debated as a challenge that was recognised as a challenge, but it didn't stop collaboration. So the studio became a bilingual environment, both online and face-to-face. We've found that of all the groups involved in our projects, the most equipped to collaborate across culture in terms of language are the Chinese students. Translation is essential. All our lectures were translated, but it's also important in the online side of things as well. So we're increasingly integrating this bilingual aspect online as well. We also post lectures to the website as videos so students can go back and review them at their own pace. One of the big differences between what happens in Chinese classrooms and what happens in Australian classrooms is that Chinese classrooms tend to be very teacher-centred. Therefore the issue of language is an important one in what we're doing in regard to the input of Chinese lecturers. And correspondingly, because of that teacher-centeredness, the input of Chinese students as well. This is a transcript from a chat that I had with a mentor in 2008 about what was happening in the Collaborate project, and it kind of suggested maybe we were imposing, or that maybe there were perceptions of us imposing an overly Western approach to the process. And I think that this clip highlights this difference as well.
They usually follow their teacher's thinking, you know. Yeah. The teacher said, what should he do? They must to do this, you know. Just like the Professor Richard, the Professor Ian, Professor Rose, they don't tell me what I must to do it, but they give me some useful suggestion to improve my projects, you know.
Okay, now I mentioned this silence before. This is an interesting comparison from 2008. On the left-hand side, you can see the logins per day throughout the 8-week period. On the right-hand side, you can see that the actual number of posts, very, very small levels of posts, particularly when we go into the data and look at it from the Chinese students. So essentially they're lurking, they're there all the time, but they're not talking. They're silent. Australian students, we find, use the space as a space for dialogue. So just like they use a real space in their day-to-day classes. This suggests that the way the students are using the website and the process is kind of like Starr and Greisman's idea of boundary objects. And boundary objects are things like where you can see in this image here. This is a student from Donghua and a student from COFA communicating through sketching. And the sketch becomes this object that they use in different ways, because they're not using language here to communicate, they're using the sketch to communicate. So it becomes a boundary object. So objects that are adaptable to the different groups who use them. And I think this is what's happening with our websites as well, but in regard to the silence of students. It's interesting to note that after the face-to-face studio, the Chinese students started to use the website, and we were getting comments like this, how much they actually enjoyed using the platform. Just to conclude, I think that if you are interested in doing this kind of project, you need to take a long-term view of what you're going to embark upon. There are a number of culturally embedded ways of thinking and operating in the world that can perhaps be exemplified by this notion of guangxi, which translates into the idea of relationship. You can't really make anything happen in China if you don't build guangxi. And it relates, I think, strongly to that notion of trust. I'd just like to say that I think our students everywhere know that these kinds of interactions are important in a globalized world. We just have to take action and try and make it happen. Okay, thanks.